about 80%, this sounds like a weird number, but about 80% about what people did was what they called non-value add activity. In Lean, they defined value by 3 points. They defined it as something that has positive transformation, an activity that has positive transformation. It must be done right the first time, which makes sense. If you're doing something the second, third, or fourth time, the previous ones had no value because you didn't get it done. And then people must provide intrinsic value, like people must be willing to pay for it.
Today we have Larry with MuniBilling in studio, and we're going to be talking about Lean Six Sigma, which is one of the many different ways that you could choose to operate a business from a management and culture standpoint.
So Lean came from manufacturing, Six Sigma came from manufacturing, but two different areas, one more in the technology, because we went from manufacturing of cars, which is the big dominant in the mid-20th century, manufacturing of hardware in the 80s, to now software is the dominant thing. So you had these kind of things coming together, and Six Sigma, Lean being system-wide, said, well, nothing's going to work unless everybody aligns. And you think about it from a system standpoint rather than just individual processes.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Beyond Rent. Today we have Larry with MuniBilling in studio, and we're going to be talking about Lean Six Sigma, which is one of the many different ways that you could choose to operate a business from a management and culture standpoint. This is a topic I don't know a whole lot about quite yet, so we're excited to have Larry joining us. Larry, welcome to Beyond Rent.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's a nice place you got here. I like this.
Yeah, thanks for joining us in studio. It's always a pleasure when we can have somebody actually in the office, in the studio, recording an episode. And this is a great topic. These are words that I've heard in the past, right? Lean, Six Sigma. I've heard these things mentioned before, but like I said, I don't know a whole lot about them. So I'm interested to learn a lot from you today. But before we get into the topic, I want to make sure our audience knows who you are. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about.
All right. My name's Larry Foster. I'm currently the president of MuniBilling. We're a utility billing company. We operate in the multifamily industry under the brand name MultiBilling. I've been in the billing industry about 30 years. Started off in the data center telecommunication billing. And prior to that, I was IT director at university. And then prior to that, I taught electrical engineering at the university. So I've kind of come the opposite way of both paths. But been in billing for a long time, and logistics in the military as logistics officer. So kind of where I am now, I think there's a great opportunity here, which I'm excited to be talking about this topic, because I think the multifamily industry is poised for this type of evolution, or if you want a paradigm shift with embracing these principles here.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that background on what you've been up to. And I do agree. I think a lot of companies are looking for better ways to operate, better ways to bring culture, management styles into their business. And I see that a lot kind of on the technology side as people look to automate or even use AI, things like that. But we're not really here to talk about the technology side as much, which is exciting because a lot of times we do talk about technology quite a bit. So to really kick off our topic, Larry, how about you go ahead and give us a little bit of maybe history around this? Because while it's something I've heard about for a while, I don't really know how old these concepts are.
Okay, yeah, very good question. It is. It's not the opposite of technology, but I think this should precede any investments in technology. Because we tend to go look at automating something. Well, we're going to automate the mess that we're trying to get out of. It's like, well, we just automated our mess. So Lean and Six Sigma, they're kind of like two long lost lovers that finally came together, if you will. Lean has been around for a long time. I guess you could say it started post-World War II. When you think about it started in Japan, and let's think about what was Japan after World War II. They had no manufacturing. They had really hardly any manpower. So they had an opportunity to rethink everything. And in the middle of the 20th century, that was the industrial age. Everybody came in and they did certain things, and they did that every day for 25, 30, 40 years. And it was mandated by the government, the top management on down. This is how it works, and this is what you did. And really, employees didn't have much of a voice there. And so Japan was trying to work its way out of the ashes, literally the ashes, and trying to compete on a global stage. So they were open to a lot of things. And at the time, post World War II, the story of Professor Deming coming over there and helping them rebuild their infrastructure. And by the 50s, they were really starting to think differently. And what I would say the beginnings of Lean started at, they call it TPS, Toyota Production Systems. So Toyota Production Systems, a couple engineers there were looking at what they're doing, and they said, we're never going to be able to compete, because think about Japan, they had to bring in all their supplies. So they had to run, quote unquote, lean as much as possible. So they were rethinking and looking at stuff, and they realized that about 80%, this sounds like a weird number, but about 80% about what people did was what they called non-value add activity. And they sat down and they came up with a definition of what value is, and they called it three things. Value, for something to be called value, because people use that word loosely. Oh, there's no value in that, or that's valuable. Well, in Lean, they define value by 3 points. They defined it as something that has positive transformation, an activity that has positive transformation. It must be done right the first time, which makes sense. If you're doing something the second, third, or fourth time, the previous ones had no value because you didn't get it done. And then people must provide intrinsic value, like people must be willing to pay for it. All right, so they use that as their guiding post. So that started in the 50s. And it was in the manufacturing industry. And if you can remember back in like the 80s, there was a movie, Gun Ho. Remember, by this time, the Japanese car manufacturers were really just kicking America's butt. The cars were of superior quality. They were less expensive, but America was kind of scratching its head going, what's going on? There was like a movie, Gung Ho, made and kind of made fun of the whole thing, you know. So that was kind of inching along in the 80s. And then in the 80s, that's kind of when the technology, Silicon Valley started taking off, and chip manufacturing and things of that nature. So what happened then is the technology industry started reaching manufacturing proportions or capacity similar to what the car manufacturing been doing for the last 60 years. And another company, Motorola, and if you remember back in the 80s, the beepers, right? They were mass producing those, and if they had any problems, digital's digital. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. They were just wasting manufacturing. So a QA manager, I think his name was Bill Smith at Motorola in Chicago, started rethinking everything. And they came up with the concept of Six Sigma, which Six Sigma it's a mathematical thing, meaning that no more than 3 failures per million parts. And you think, well, we don't put out 1 million parts of anything. Well, but in the silicon industry, the chip manufacturing, you're putting out millions of parts a week. So, having 3 failures per week is it was within the tolerance, but they were having 10, 15%. So that's 100,000, 150,000 errors. So Lean came from manufacturing. Six Sigma came from manufacturing, but 2 different areas, one more in the technology. And there's actually more when you look at how they kind of came together. In the late 80s, another place, Honda City, there was a middle manager, of all people, put out a paper called Toward Middle Up Down Management. You're like, well, that's a weird name of a paper. But basically what he was saying is in the paper, and it became very famous because Harvard Business Review got a hold of it. And as soon as HBR gets a hold of anything, everybody's got to read it. But he basically said is the role of middle management, which you always see people make jokes about it. Oh, I strive to be a middle manager, is to take the vision and synthesize it with the practical of what's going on. So then you had Lean, which is kind of a top down, and you had Six Sigma, which is kind of coming from the QA. All of a sudden, you had a new way of looking at things called Toward Middle Up Down, saying really the people that know what's going on is your frontline managers, your frontline people. So what they need to do is they need to be empowered with tools that they can make those decisions as they need to move forward. And then I'd say the fourth dimension where these things all started coming together was a concept called Agile. Agile is a mindset, but it's not a process. But in the late 90s, an Agile manifesto, these guys got together in the software industry and defined this thing called the Agile Manifesto as a way to produce software. Now, why did that finally gain? Because we went from manufacturing of cars, which is the big dominant in the mid-20th century, manufacturing of hardware in the 80s, to now software is the dominant thing. So you had these kind of things coming together, and then you had these technology companies like Rent Manager, like MuniBilling and stuff. The engineering was kind of operating on their way of doing things. We're Scrum. We got Scrum Masters. We've got all this stuff and Agile. they were doing their thing, but the rest of the company wasn't aligned with it. So Lean and Six Sigma, Lean being system-wide, said, well, nothing's going to work unless everybody aligns. And you think about it from a system standpoint rather than just individual processes. So it's been like you said, it's been around for a long time. You're talking 70 years, Lean's been around. You talk 40 years. Six Sigma's been around 25 years. Agile's been around. And really in the last 7 years, these kind of all come together. And that's where you came up with Lean Six Sigma. So they did start off separate, and now they've come together. And there's other things, a lot of Lean, different incarnations of Lean are happening along the way. So long story there.
Well, thanks for all that insight. And there's so much value in what you just said there. Some of the key things that I pulled out was, the fact that 80% of what they identified that people were doing did not bring value. And it's ironic how often this idea of the 80-20 rule comes up in a lot of our conversations, because it's really true. When we think about 80% of this or 20% of that, it's just this ratio that always comes around. So I think there's a lot of value in understanding that. Is your team doing things where you think they're providing value 80% of the time or 20% of the time, and where maybe you fall into there? And I also love this concept of multiple industries doing things that then transfer over into new industries, or we kind of borrow, steal, learn from other industries. Like you said, the manufacturing of cars over to technology hardware, over to technology software, and how they're all doing these things that eventually they overlap and fit together, and create new things as they go forward. So a lot of that history, I think, is important to understanding just maybe how when I say we, the multifamily residential property management industry can leverage these tools and think about them in those unique ways. So thanks for providing that deep level of insight into the background in the many, many years. And I guess when we think about the history, I also want to know, how long have you been learning and becoming educated and implementing the Lean Six Sigma yourself?
Well, okay, that's a great question. I thought about that, and I was like, well, it's been late 90s. So Motorola started Six Sigma, and then Jack Welch, famous CEO at GE, embraced Six Sigma in the 90s. And so they started Six Sigma academies, and people became black belts. And you can become a black belt in Lean, and Lean black belt in Six Sigma. And that was up in New York. And I was working for a telecommunications company upstate New York. And a lot of people started leaving General Electric and becoming their own consultants, because General Electric, became the story. At that time, they were the largest company in the world. And so everybody's like, whatever they're doing, we want to do. So we started hiring these Six Sigma consultants. They came in. And so that's been probably about 25 years, But the way I learned it is the exact opposite. I recommend anybody else learn it. You don't start with Six Sigma. Start with Lean. And I didn't learn Lean until probably 10 years later. And I thought when I was learning Lean, I was like, man, I should have learned this first, because this Lean is how you start. Six Sigma, and I'll explain, the difference there is where you refine your processes. Because Six Sigma is predicated on the fact that you have really well-defined processes, like General Electric, like Motorola, and all you're trying to do is get rid of the variance, improve your quality. But if your process is messed up to begin with, or you don't have a well-defined process, or everybody in your organization does that process slightly different, you'll never get to the point where you're getting rid of variance. You got to have a baseline. So I've been I'd say I've been Six Sigma Lean for 25 years, but I've been Lean Six Sigma for about 10. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. I really appreciate that difference in that explanation there, and you having the insight to kind of recommend where to start. So maybe that's where we take the conversation next, is maybe diving into that Lean side and what that means and what that is focused on and what that looks like versus Six Sigma. And you started explaining a little bit there as far as where it's more process driven versus variance reduction. Is that a good place to go before we talk about the actual multifamily application of it?
Oh, yeah, that's a great place to start. Good question. So I would say Lean, if you were to identify Lean is all about identifying and eliminating waste. Right. And when you talk about it, it's really focused on optimizing efficiency. You almost start to think, well, I could see where this could be helpful. And maybe that's all we need in multifamily. So identify, eliminate waste, improve efficiencies, improve value to the customer. Everything in Lean is customer centric. It's the whole concept of developing essentially your manufacturing line. They call them value streams. And remember, we said there's a definition for value, and you break down your processes into each activity, and then you analyze them and how they contribute to that. And you mentioned that 80-20 rule, and I've seen that over and over again. We go in and do these events, and in Lean they call them Kaizen events, where you go in and look at a process, and you'll find out, you're doing a lot of stuff that doesn't add value. It doesn't mean you get rid of all what they call non-value add, because in our industry, there's things you have to do that don't add value. When things are going, like say vertical, like compliance, you got to report on things. That's not adding value to the customer, but it's required. Right? There might be some procedure or some quality checks. That's not necessarily adding value, but it's validating something that should be done. So Lean isn't about getting rid of all waste, but it's about optimizing what you're doing. And then Six Sigma is all about eliminating variance and improving quality. So that's where they kind of come together. Like I said, they're apart for many years, and then I think naturally people just said, well, these two mints in one, if you will, peanut butter and chocolate, got the Reese's version of Lean Six Sigma. So, but the philosophy of Lean, it's been around for a long time. I mean, Mark Twain said, continuous improvement is better than deferred perfection, something like that, right? And so 150 years ago, they started realizing Lean is all about incremental improvement, no big bang. Where Six Sigma, you're not really doing any big bang. You're just tweaking and tuning things. That's why I'm saying I learned it in reverse. It's like, we're going to fine tune what? We hit a mess. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, perfection is the enemy of progress. So probably one of the things that's difficult for people to embrace up front is in Lean, you'll identify a lot of things. And you talked about the 80-20 rule, which is based on a Pareto analysis, which was a mathematician, hundreds of years ago who invented all that, and said, well, you're going to get most of your gain by focusing on your 20%. Get rid of, don't prioritize it towards the 20. So what's hard is you'll say, well, we got to do everything. Well, that's like boiling the ocean to make a pot of tea. You just don't. You got to focus on something and start small, and then nail that, and then go to the next one, and then go to the next one. So that's the whole concept of Lean: continuous improvement, incremental continuous improvement. And they give you a set of tools and techniques to do that. And so does Six Sigma. Six Sigma being more statistical and mathematical, Lean being very, when we go through it, you'll say, well, that's just all makes sense, natural, it's easy.
Well, and I think that's what a lot of people want too. They want guidance and structure on how to get better at things. And there's a lot of talk in our industry and any industry about how to do that. And what I tend to see is people want to jump right to the technology piece of it with automation. I hear that a lot, that people, I just want to automate this. I just don't want to think about this piece anymore. And oftentimes the conversation needs to be reversed. And we say, well, what are you even trying to automate? What's your process that you're automating? And the answer is like, well, we're not really sure what the process looks like today. We have a few different people doing things, but they're all doing it differently. But we just want to automate it so they don't have to do it. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there is you have to actually define the process. You have to control that situation, find out what's really working before you can apply any philosophy to it for making those things better. So when I think about our industry specifically, I can understand how all these things apply to manufacturing and technology. I don't know if I understand quite yet how it applies to our industry for the multifamily. So maybe we even start with not saying how it applies, but what are just some of the general benefits as you see it? Because again, talking about cars, I can see manufacturing lines set up and why it's so important to have all of these things really dialed in, because you're trying to produce the same vehicle over and over again. But what are some of the benefits directly to the multifamily and residential property management space?
Okay. And I hear that a lot too. You need to do technology to automate, and you used to automate what? So when you look at multifamily, there's a lot of what I'd say complex, multifaceted processes. And I say complex because it involves more than one person, more than one system, and there's a lot of activities involved. So, and they're high volume. So I said, why did Lean come to bear? Why did Six Sigma come to bear? Why did Agile come to bear? Because the volume of what they were doing overwhelmed their capacity based on their old way of doing things. So they had to kind of stop what they were doing, rethink it. And I think this is an opportune time for multifamily because the volume and rented property is going up and up. It's an industry that's going to continue to grow. And if we continue to do the way we're doing things, we can't expect a different outcome. In fact, we should expect a degraded outcome because our capacity is not going to be able to keep up. And hiring more people, and that's a big concept within Lean. When you don't identify your constraints, it's like taking a hose and it gets twisted and I'm not getting any water at the end. So keep turning up the water. Still no water is coming out the end. And it's the same concept when you apply people. If you're applying people to a process and you haven't eliminated the constraints, you're just spending more money on the same old way of doing things. So when you look at multifamily, you got a lot of high volume. You got people wanting to create a lease, move-ins. You got people that are moving. You've got service requests. You got incidents. You got lease renewals. You've got billing. You've got all sorts of things going on, and they're multifaceted, very complex. And just automating those, automation technology should be looked at as the enabler, where Lean and Six Sigma should be looked at as, you said, the process, the system. And that's what Lean is all about, is looking at things from a system standpoint and not just automating. We're going to get a mobile phone for everybody. Okay, but what if we're going to create a constraint is they could overwhelm us now, everybody who could get a hold of us anywhere, anytime. But if we haven't changed our back-end processes, all we're going to do is get a backlog of requests that we can't facilitate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that point referencing solving problems through more people. And a lot of times that's actually what we think, right? When we face a constraint, our thought is, well, we just don't have enough people involved in. And what you're saying is we should stop and say, well, what's the process? What are the actual constraints? And we can hire people all day long and maybe not create a better process or experience, maybe even a worse one. So and you talked about a little bit of like the leasing process and so forth. Are there some examples that maybe you could give us for ways that you would apply some of these philosophies directly into the property management space, so people can maybe break down the exact nuances of how Lean gets applied to, and it could be the leasing process?
Okay, yeah, and if you could bear with me, I think I'd like to take a step back a little bit before I actually put it into a use case.
Yeah.
So if you look at Lean, we said it's all about identifying waste. Well, how do you identify waste? Well, there's waste over there. Oh, there's waste over there. He's a waste. It's like, we talked about they have a value for what value is, definition, but how do they define waste, right? How do they define things that aren't what? There's a bunch of acronyms, but the one I like, the one I've remembered over the last 20 years is Tim Woods, Tim Woods, right? And those are the 8 dimensions of waste. And let's go look at, and the reason I wanted to take a step back and look at this, because if I define those, then we can show how that applies to any process in Lean. So Tim Woods, T stands for transportation. So that's a form of waste. Things are, maybe you're mailing in your application for a lease or something like that. You're transporting it. So think of all the waste and delay getting things in there. Somebody's filling out a paper form, sending it in. Now, a lot of that's been replaced with portals. But if we don't, it said we got to look at the system, the whole process. So T being, transportation, I being inventory. And think of inventory and the knowledge worker as work that's not been completed. I've got a pile of stuff in my desk. That's inventory. I've got a pile of requests. I've got things that aren't done. So that's a form of waste. M being movement. How many different ways do I've got to take this piece of paper, or I've got to give it to somebody else. I've filled out a form, I've filled out a service request, now I got to give it to a field technician to go out there and fix something. That's a form of waste. W being waiting. I can't work until my upstream partner is finished, right? So I'm waiting, I'm sitting idle. That's a form of waste. And then the OO, over-processing and overproduction. Over-processing means, here's an example. Okay, I fill out that lease form. I filled it out. And then I take whatever that person did and I enter it into another system. So I've just done the same thing. In the world of Lean, I've not added any value. I took the original content and just transcribed it, right? And then overproduction is like, well, I've got to send out these notifications for billing. Maybe they're lease renewals. And so I've got 100 lease renewals coming up this week. So I better print out 100 lease renewals notifications and stamp on the door. But then we find out during that week, 80 of them went ahead and did it. So I overproduced, 80 notifications. And D being defects, pretty easy. If you don't do it right, it's waste, right? And then S being skills, which is another thing we don't think about, is automation doesn't help if we don't have the people with the right skills to do what we need to get done. And you had talked about the training you guys do here and all that. There's that saying is like, what if we train them and they leave? And then the scary part is, well, what if we don't train them and they stay? And that's a form of waste. So if you take those definitions of waste, and they use a term called gemba, which is go see. They got all these nice Japanese terms, and I'm horrible at saying them because I come from the Midwest. You take those and you, as an observer, like what you're doing today, and go see, then anybody can identify that's an activity. Well, that's a transportation activity. Well, that's unfinished work. Oh, that person's been waiting for so-and-so. And you classify these things, and you do it across every step of that process. In a lease, maybe it's a new lease, right? Well, did that person have to fill out that form? Did that person, when they filled out the form, was it incomplete inventory? Was it incorrect? All those things you start analyzing. So you look at the whole system, start to finish, and each activity, you just put a box there. People think of workflow as all the flow charting and stuff. That's way too detailed at this level. It's very, very easy. That's when you get into Six Sigma and you're getting into how long that activity takes and all this stuff. So we think about it from the perspective of how long does the whole activity take? And in the world of lead, that's called lead time. What's the lead time? If I submit a lease, it's going to take me 2 days, 5 days, 2 weeks to do all my credit checks and all that stuff. So all those are part of the activity. So in the world of lean, you look at each activity and you define it and say, well, how long does it take to do that activity? And then how do you receive? How do you know when to start? Well, I come to work and there's a pile of work on my desk, or I get an email. I check my text messages. And now with all these forms of technology, I got to check my text. I got to check my email. I got to check my voicemail. I got to go to the web. It's like, well, technology is not helping you there, right? It's making your work more overproduce to get the same thing done you could have done by this one thing. So I measure how long each activity takes. That's called the flow time. And then I actually start to finish of each tech. And then how much time is that person actually doing on that? It's called cycle time. So you start looking at these things: lead time from the customer's perspective, flow time, how long it sat on that person's desk, cycle time, how much time they actually spent doing it. And then you have what they call like a rejection rate. It's like when they get it done, was it done right the first time? So you just apply those concepts to each activity of that process. And when you measure them all up, you start seeing, there's where my problems are. I've got, and that's what I was saying about 80% waste. You literally do see people are, when you categorize it with the Tim Woods, how much time people are applying towards wasteful activities versus how much time people are spending on the actual cycle time. And instead of going out and getting the nice, cool mobile phone because your competitor, mobile app because your competitor has that mobile app, it'd be better in time and essentially inexpensive, almost free, to spreadsheet this out and look at what it is and then aggressively go after that process itself. And then you determine what your capacity is, and then you can see, you set that as your benchmark, and now you have, okay, if we were to change the process, if we were to automate it through technology, what would be the expected return on that investment rather than just putting technology to the problem? Does that help? Does that address your question?
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I really loved where you ended there, because it is that idea of knowing all of that. And that's a lot to know before you start making decisions on technology and where you want to, improve the situation. Because a lot of times people work the other way around, right? They hear about a new technology, a new piece of software, some new automation, and they just make this assumption that if they just implement that, that'll solve all of their problems, when a lot of times they don't even know where the waste is today, right? And this idea of the Tim Woods, and you walked us through all of those details really well to understand all of these different places that it could exist. And it sounds like, as much as knowing how all of this works, there is such a deep level of, a shifted mindset that must happen in starting to look at all of these things as a step in a sort of manufacturing world, right? Because everything is a process at the end of the day, and everything could be viewed in that way, where a lot of times we just simply don't. We kind of segment things. We kind of say, well, that's just the way it works. That's just the way it has to be done, or that's the way we've always done it, instead of saying, well, what if this was a manufacturing plant, or we had an assembly line? What would this look like if you lined up your process from start to finish?
And that's what they call the value stream. So you think in the most macro sense, raw metal goes into a car manufacturing plant and a car comes out, magically comes out. But you think about all the suppliers, all the logistics, everything's coming in and contributing to each element as that car gets built, that at the end you have a transformed product that people are willing to pay for. And the same thing applies in every aspect of multifamily, all those processes we talked about. And if you thought about it, talk about inventory. If you go to a gas station, when you finally start adopting this, everywhere you go, you think about how they could improve their process, or how they thought about it and how they did improve it. If you went to the gas station and they would only send when you swipe your credit card, you got to wait till they get 10, and then they'd send them up 10 at a time. And you were number one, you had to wait for 10 more cars to show up, 9 more cars to show up before they swipe. You go, that's crazy, But the same thing kind of applies in any process we're talking about. A lot of times they'll say, well, I've got an issue, or I'll wait till something breaks before I fix it. Lean and Six Sigma is all about going from evolving, as you said, a mind shift change from the reactive stage, waiting for something to happen, to the proactive stage, as you said, modeling that value stream out, all the activities, and looking at it pragmatically, statistically, mathematically, and saying, where are it? And one of the things that's hard to do is usually when you have a process with multiple people, all you care about, the WIFM, what's in it for me? How am I going to fix my process? How am I going to automate my process? And you got to look at it as a collection of things, because a car doesn't work if it's only got 3 tires. A car doesn't work if it's missing something. You got to look at it as the collection of everything along the lines. And so the value stream is defined as everything it takes from the moment the person requests something to the moment they receive value. So that's, like when you said a lease, you've got to go talk to a bank or whatever, the credit checks, that's a component of it. So your suppliers, in that case, some external credit agency, is part of that value stream. So it's not just looking at within your company, it's looking at it from the value stream. Everything in Lean comes from the customer's perspective, customer centricity. You look at it, they call it SIPOC, supplier input process. That's what we like, our process. Output, customer. So we've got to look at every process, how it ultimately contributes to the consumer.
That makes sense. And your example of the gas station is really intriguing, because you're absolutely right. I got gas on the way to work today, right? And I pulled in and I swiped my credit card and I pumped gas and I left instantly. No interaction, right, from anyone. It's a good customer experience. We don't really think about some of these truly, I guess, automated things that exist in our society now, but I didn't have to wait for any other scenarios. Now, I kind of do wonder what this does look like in other scenarios, because there are situations where batching things, I think, would make sense,
absolutely.
Right? As somebody that's manufacturing cars, if they need 100 windshields a day, they're not ordering those one at a day. They're not even ordering those 100 at a time, right? They're ordering those in batches and receiving those in batches, because you would never receive one windshield at a time. So is there a philosophy, or is there something tied to Lean that helps you understand kind of that side from the supplier and the inventory of when you want to intake in bulk versus maybe process individually?
Yeah, there's no pat rule, but okay. So the ultimate goal is to align lead time with flow time. The time you asked for it, and that everything is happening and continuing. Like you said, the gas station. I go in there. There's no disruption, right? That's where you ultimately want to go, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, there's a really good video on the internet of the BMW plant in Germany and one in South Carolina. I didn't know every BMW. I don't know BMW is custom made. Didn't know that, and because you pick your color when they originally manufacture, you get to pick certain things, but the whole plant is a value stream. So obviously, there's certain things like I'm not going to sit there and do a green car and then do a black car, do a white car because I'm having to redo the bath every time, the paint, right? So when you look at your value stream, you determine, okay, some of these things are better done in batch, and some of these things are better done. You want to achieve flow. So you're organizing the system around what they call, that would be a constraint, right? How do you do it? So, you can't have 50 cars waiting to get painted, but what you can do is organize in the fact that I've got 3 white cars, 3 green cars, 3 red cars, whatever, so you're able to do that, get flow within that, not having to change the paint every time. So if you look at it from the principles of lead time, flow time, cycle time, rejection rate, and then striving towards, and lean is always the pursuit of, but never perfection, right? It's always in the pursuit of perfection. And understanding where you need to batch things and where you can achieve flow, that's how you get it. Some of the fallacies people do with technology, they go, well, I put it all in one system, then of course it's as automated as it's going to get. And sometimes you find out that's actually doesn't achieve what you want it to be, right? Because you think about in a car manufacturing, they're not necessarily, the people who are assembling aren't the ones who build the engine. That's an engine company. They're not the ones who did the windshield, like you said. These are all suppliers. So you want to look at your value stream and figure out which part should be part of your core competency and which part of it should be part of your supplier competency. If that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the angles that I think that applies to the multifamily property management side could even be maintenance. There's some companies that decide to do that in-house, right, where they have their own maintenance staff and they're maintaining things, taking care of all the service issues with their own staff, versus this idea of outsourcing it. It's kind of that same idea: is where's their strength, where are they most competent, and should they choose one or the other? And I think that's a similar idea, right? Do I use an outside supplier versus something internally? And again, thinking about car manufacturing, I don't know if there's any car manufacturers out there that are building their own engines. I'd imagine there are, where other ones are outsourcing that, right? And they're using, I guess, shared resources outside their company to improve the end result on the inside. So I think there's a lot of similarities that we can draw from one industry to the next. And I think that's exciting. So when we think about, this whole idea of lean and how it works into really kind of our industry and the property management space, where do you think the idea of like reducing cost and looking at profitability really align? Because at the end of the day, I think that's where most business leaders their minds will gravitate towards, right? This idea of reducing waste should have an impact on the bottom line. Is that a result that you tend to see?
Oh yeah.
And is that really the focus, or is it more about the customer, or are they well aligned in that space?
Well, okay. I got to quote the right person. I think it was Drucker, Peter Drucker, famous guy, said, those that focus on cost will do it at the expense of quality, but those that focus on quality will see the reduced cost. So centering things around customers doesn't mean you're foregoing everything. You're designing, architecting your process for the consumer. That's the person who's paying you the money. And if you can't provide them a quality product in a timely manner that meets their satisfaction, then they're going to go somewhere else, right? So the concept of focusing on the customer is a guiding point. But where do you see the cost? Okay, let's just say in multifamily, there's a lot of variable costs that the property managers have no control over, meaning that insurance goes up, that they can't do anything about it. Utilities go up, can't do anything about it. New laws get created, can't do anything about it. A water line breaks, can't do anything about it. So when you talk about a leakage or something like that, how can we prevent that leakage? That's what lean's about, is how do you prevent recurrence? You do things like root cause analysis. There's a great video out there. It's like 2 minutes, and it kind of nails everything about what you just mentioned. There's a video about the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, right? And so it was getting overrun by these bugs, and the government in its infinite wisdom thought, okay, we got to spend all this money. We're going to spray all these bugs off because we can't have this for visitors because it's going to look crappy, right? Because what was happening with the bugs? When the bugs came, the birds came. What did the birds do? pooped all over the place. And so, they're making a mess. So they're spray washing. They're going, oh my gosh, this is starting to wear down this granite that's been here for 200 years. What are we going to do there? And so they started spending all this money and just kind of looking at each thing discreetly. And finally, somebody took a step back and said, well, why, started doing what they call a root cause analysis. Why is something happening? There's a famous technique, a popular technique called 5 whys, meaning that if you look at something, and in Six Sigma, they call it DMEAC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. You've probably heard of plan, do, check. It's actually plan, do, study, PDSA. So that's the lean version. Then there's the Six Sigma. Somebody said, well, what are we doing here? Why are these bugs here? No, what it was is why are we spraying the granite? Well, because the birds are pooping on the granite. Well, why are the birds pooping on the granite? Because they're coming after these bugs. Well, why are the bugs showing up? And finally they got to the point where they said, oh, the bugs show up as soon as we turn the lights on. And they said, oh, the easy answer would be, let's turn the lights off, and then the bugs go away. And this happens a lot. I mean, multifamily, these kind of silly things happen. And when you watch this, it's like, oh boy, this is something that we could relate to. So when you look at stuff and say there's some philosophy, if you let your philosophy, which is almost like it become prideful, then you're doing something, but you're not looking at it from the perspective of the customer. If we have a philosophy, everything is done in-house. Okay, that's your philosophy. But is that the best thing for the customer? Is it even the most cost-effective thing for the customer? As you said, I don't know any car manufacturer that builds their own tires. They all have to rely on some type of tire manufacturer. So there's a dependency. In the world of lean, suppliers are treated just like internal employees. I think you guys have a culture like that. You guys have a marketplace where everybody's open and all that stuff. That's a kind of a lean philosophy. You don't treat suppliers any different. You treat each other with equal respect because you're all geared towards the same outcome, making it right for the customer. So yes, I would say centering on the customer helps you get rid of all the pridefulness, helps you get rid of all the, well, is that really the right philosophy if we're trying to control cost, if we're trying to improve quality, if we're trying to achieve consistency, if we're trying to reduce the lead time and optimize our resources and eliminate those dimensions of waste. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And that story about turning the lights off is such a great example that you really need to understand what's really happening and why it's happening before you try to come up with solutions and understanding that why. And I have heard of the 5 whys, like just keep asking why. And it seems a little repetitive but it's true. You have to kind of keep digging a little bit deeper to understand those whys. So I think that's a great example. So, as we think about our industry, are there some common challenges that you believe Lean Six Sigma is specifically, I guess, designed or could be most beneficial for our industry to help solve? Because there's a lot of challenges in our industry, but are there any specific that stand out to you?
I don't know if there's any specific things that stand out to me. It's just I could look at everything we do in this industry, everything, not one thing, but everything, and I could apply Lean and Six Sigma to it to help improve it. I mean, people get shocked. The big thing you're hearing right now in multifamily, our insurance is going through the roof. Why is my insurance going through the roof? Well, because I had 5 claims last year. Well, why'd you have 5 claims last year? We had 4 leaks and we had this. It's like, well, why'd you have 4 leaks? Well, because this toilet broke or whatever. It's like, well, now we're starting to get to the root cause of, hey, if we were doing preventative maintenance, scheduled preventative maintenance, we could reduce the probability of leaks or busted toilets or busted water fountains or what have you. And then that would reflect on my insurance. So a lot of times we don't want to look at root cause from the actual thing that happened as much as look at it holistically and think about, because most often what I find out is the activity that's experiencing the problem, it's usually the supplier to that activity that's more the root cause to that problem. So if I look at, we're getting incomplete. Our renters, when they fill out a form, it's awful. It's like, well, why is it awful? Why can some people fill it out perfectly and some people can't? Well, people are different. So let's make that process to the point where let's go interview people and find out why they're having those challenges, rather than just saying, oh, let's put more help up there. Let's do this. Let's do that. We'll make that a required field. And then people say, well, screw this. I don't want to do this anymore. Well, let's go rethink it. And then we look at it from the user perspective. And here's an example. We talked about it came from the technology industry. When Steve Jobs, everybody has the Steve Jobs story. When he came back to Apple in 97, I think there was like 20 some odd products. And they had 18 competing products, meaning that a product had another alternative. So you had all these options. And he drew a 2x2 square and said, we're going to have residential and business. That's it, residential and business. We're going to have, no competing products, and he got rid of everything. So basically, it's when you said, what's the paradigm shift? You got to be willing to kind of blow it up and say, let's take a step back. Are we really looking at it from the customer, or if we created a Frankenstein without realizing it, we just keep bolting on technology, bolting on new capabilities, twisting and turning. And yet when we look at the Tim Woods approach, we'd realize, some of the things we're doing are actually contributing to waste rather than even automation, even some technologies may be amplifying waste rather than taking a step back and looking at it from a system standpoint. And so you take Apple, who was almost broke in 97, and flip forward about 12 years later, and they're the most valuable company in the world. They rethought everything from the customer standpoint, got rid of the confusion, and not thinking about it as a product, but really thought about it as a value.
And with it being so, I would say, customer focused and customer driven, that makes sense. And again, the Apple example is a great one as far as focusing in, thinking about where the value is and where the value will be in the future, very customer focused. One of the things that I've noticed, while we tend to focus on the tenant or resident experience in our industry, which is great, we should focus on that. There's also a little bit of a shift to focusing on the employee, the staff experience. So what does this look like from that perspective? Because at the end of the day, the end result is giving a better customer experience, but it is the staff, it's the employee, it's the team that needs to implement and put all these things in place. What's the experience like for them? Because it seems like a lot of change could come from implementing something like this.
Yeah, that's a great question, because let's go back to the first thing one of the first things I talked about was that paper toward, middle, up, down. And in the world of lean, it's the frontline employee that's driving the change. So people come to work and they're stressed. Stress is a fear of the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to get 20 applicants and we can't process them. I don't know who's going to show up for work. I don't know if this system's going to break. That's stress. And then you got the anxiety is I can't control something that I can't control. So when you look at the world of lean, you're looking at it as a system. So you're not sitting there, your upstream and your downstream processes become part of you, right? You no longer look at yourself discreetly, but more part of a family. So what you see with employees, so you're striving for better satisfaction. So if I'm an employee and I know what I'm doing is improving the quality and satisfaction of our customers, my stress starts to go away because I'm not afraid that the customer's not going to be happy, right? And in the world of lean, you empower them with these tools, these techniques, these principles and methods, and they're nothing that difficult. The employee is driving it. So it's not an edict from top down. It's the person who's creating value saying, you know what we're doing here is not creating value. So you see a complete employee empowerment along the way. And now you have what they call the inverted organization. And that's how I see myself in my organization. My job is to support a group of leaders who support the frontline people who get the job done. So you have to have your company, look at your company as the value stream creators and make sure there's flow in there and everything you're doing vertically is not adding value. So you've got to look at yourself and say, okay, the organization exists because you have highly specialized areas who need to interoperate and ultimately create value for whatever consumer is your target consumer. So if you look at it from that perspective, I would say the employees get a sense of ownership because they own that process. It's not do this, do that. Going back to the mid-20th century when everything you did was what your manager told you to do. Your job is to put on a dashboard, you put in 20 dashboards an hour and you do that 8 hours a day. No, we're looking at the process, constantly, borrowing from Stephen Covey, sharpening the saw, figuring out where we can opportunities to improve, not trying to boil the ocean and do everything at once, which causes a lot of stress. Are we going to get all this done? It's all about incremental improvement and not letting progress become the enemy of perfection, become the enemy of progress. So that's what I see. I see organization, and it's not an overnight success. And I've done this a few more than once now, several times. It takes about 3 years for an organization to start the journey and feel like they're in the groove. Because typically there's going to be a champion within it, and you'd probably bring somebody else to help you get the first one started, and then but it's a culture shock. Well, people are kind of, first of all, like, well, if I automate that, then what value do I provide? And that's internal resistance to change. That's the value. If I push this into a knowledge base, then nobody's going to come and ask me about it anymore, but I'm getting rid of that waste. So there's a fear of losing my job because lean has been incorrectly used in many organizations to lean out people. It's like, oh, so that person was waste. You hired waste? Is that what you're telling me? No, it's the process. So you focus on the process and not the person, because a lot of times people don't have the skills because they were never given the training to do that. So in the beginning, you'll get people that are, I've seen this more every time I've done it, is, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work, and they kind of start working against it. But over time, when people start seeing these incremental, small successes, then the wheel in motion starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the end, you've got an organization that knows they can go to the top dog, whoever that is. Now, people, frontline, tell me all the time, Larry, this isn't going to work. Here's what you need to do. I was just in a meeting yesterday. Here's how we need to do this. This is why this is not a good idea. And if you're truly a lean culture, you hire subject matter experts to have them help you tell me how to guide the ship, rather than, I'm going to hire you. You're much smarter than me on this particular, whatever these areas are. I've got all these specialists, and somehow I know more than the sum of the parts. No, that doesn't work that way, And so it is a culture shift from top down, bottom up, toward middle up, down, that kind of stuff. So I'd say that's what it is. Employee empowerment. They've got problem-solving tools. They've got tools to identify waste. They've got tools to do root causes. And that's the front line. And it's a much higher energy environment than without it.
Yeah, well, and change is hard. And I really do love a lot of that as far as this idea of empowerment and what that looks like. Everyone in their job, I think, wants to show up, do a good job, and feel valued at the end of the day. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people currently find that value just in the task that they're doing in the production. Like, well, I processed so many of this, or I did this. And like you said, if you start removing some of those items or shifting them around, they can feel a sense of loss to what they thought value was. And as you work to realign what that should look like, right? Because their value should be in, how do I make it better? How is it a better experience for myself and for the customer as we move forward? And I think many companies are kind of built on this idea of maybe even a lack of trust of the frontline employee, right? Not listening to them and creating these processes where, oh, we don't need you to think, we just need you to do mentality. But I know I don't know everything, and I think you just admitted that you don't know everything, and I think that's a great place to be. But a lot of companies hire people based on, well, we're going to put this person in place because we think they could lead because they do know a lot about this topic. So how do you balance that? Having enough knowledge that you do know what the team is doing versus having, enough humility and lack of knowledge that you listen to those that are actually executing.
Wow, you're a very good listener. So, because you started summing up a lot of the stuff. And so you mentioned the word visibility. How do you know? So in lean, it all is about transparency. And a lot of times you can tell, and you establish longer term objectives. You call those operational key results. I'm going to drive to California. That's a result. I'm going to move from Ohio to California. But to get there, I need to select a series of key performance indicators that make sure I'm on the right journey, right? In a car, you have a gas gauge, a speedometer, oil pressure, tire pressure. And if those things are off, then you set up an objective you're never going to get to. So in lean, you have key performance indicators. You set up your goals. First, you have a company long-term vision, and then you set up your goals to help you incrementally get to that your strategy. And then you define key performance indicators, which are metrics and have measurements, right? And so from the management standpoint, what you need to know is, okay, if we've agreed these are the KPIs that are going to get us to the OKR, which is ultimately going to get us to the long-term vision, then I do have insights, the right measurements that I'm looking at, rather than trying to micromanage a person's process. Let them own the process as long as we all believe in the way we're going to get there. That I addressed, because you said a mouthful there, and I was like, wow, he's really from saying he doesn't know lean to getting into lean, he's really hitting the main points there,
Yeah, no, that's a great way to summarize it and speak deeper about it, because I think that is, I think where a lot of people struggle is they want to own the entire process in hopes that it controls the outcome, where you're saying understand what the outcome should look like and let those that are executing really dictate that process. They'll tell you the right way. I think very few people want to work harder, right? I think everyone wants that process to be smooth and efficient. And so if you tell them where the target is and say, hey, how do I best hit this target? I think most people are going to step up and say, hey, this is the way we can do it. Like, I want to work smarter, not harder, along the way. So what else do we need to know about Lean and Six Sigma before we talk about maybe some of those use case examples and what it would look like actually in our industry? Is there more we need to uncover on this topic?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, it's a journey. We could talk for a long time, and I still, and then I just would start showing you how much I don't know after a while. And you said a key thing there. It's like, we don't want to work harder. Kind of follow the philosophy is slow is smooth, and like you said, make it smooth. You said that word, but smooth is fast, because I got to flow. You think about a river when it's, there's nothing, no rocks, it's going as fast as it can. But when you start throwing barriers in there, now you start getting eddy currents and some of the water starts going backwards. So it's all about, are we on the right path and are we making the right measurements to get there? So I'd say, we talked about Lean, identify inefficiencies, eliminate waste, focus on quality, center around the customer. Six Sigma, eliminate the variance, and so if you can combine those two concepts, Lean Six Sigma, then it's applying, and there's a whole lot of detail there. I mean, they can go to our website, they can go to a lot of websites, you can do searches, a lot of free tools. I say if you're going to start this, for the first one, find somebody that has done something. You said, I don't know, I know about Lean, I know the word, I know Six Sigma, but I can tell it's all natural, it's all common sense. And you're stitching it together saying, oh, what about this, what about that? And if you bring somebody in, very soon, that person, another person, they all start understanding how to apply it. The Lean Six Sigma doesn't have to be a specialist in multifamily. It could help. They just need to be, a pragmatist, like what you're doing here, asking me practical questions based on what we're saying. Because all the stuff we're talking about, it's interesting. The people who invented Six Sigma, although it's mathematical, didn't have college degrees. People invented it. They're just people looking at things practically, pragmatically, looking at it from that perspective. So I'd say, we could talk a lot more, but, we could look at a couple of use cases. And like, my world is billing, right? So in the multifamily world, billing's big. You're an agency with a lot of properties, meaning you're getting all kinds of bills. You're having to enter those bills into an AP system, and somehow some of that data, some of those charges, you want to be able to allocate it out. So you can spread the peanut butter where I'm just going to bake it into the rent. But what happens when that expense goes up and I'm locked into a 2-year rent or a 1-year rent with a person? All I'm going to do is lose cost. So the best thing to do is to align your cost with your revenue stream and make sure you have the right processes in place. So when you receive the bills, and if those are bills that need to be allocated, maybe it's utility, maybe it's something else, some kind of grass, cutting, you're going to do that, or maintenance, you have the ability and the algorithms in place, if you will, that you're not having to do this all manually on a day-to-day basis. And because that can just consume. Often the most expensive item in the software budget is what I call the peopleware, because you're having people do so much more work when you could be using technology, but you can't use technology because the process you have wasn't, the people who designed the technology didn't design it around your hokey process. They designed things around best practice principles like ITIL, and because Lean is not a best practice, it's a framework. ITIL actually has best practice principles for managing incidents, managing service requests, managing changes, managing all those. Those are frameworks you can adopt. And if your process, you look at it and kind of benchmark it to what could be done, you're like, oh, and it's not uncommon. A lot of property managers start off, 1 or 2 apartments, and then the next thing they'll another apartment, but they haven't gone back and looked at how their processes are scaling and if they've really built in resiliency into these things. They just, we did this work for when we had 2 properties. It should work when we have 20 properties. It's not always the same. And likewise, you could be at 20, 30 properties and you're going down and the processes you had may not be, it may not be efficient anymore. And, kind of cobbling everything together and, throwing it into one technology and saying, well, we've got all this data we can look at. Well, what good is the data if the process is flawed? So that's what I'm saying. It really starts back with start with the process, start with the value stream, not just a process, and break it on down. And the people who do that every day are the experts in it. Not the president, not the upper management, not the central office. It's the people that are doing that every day. That's why this thing all starts with them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And you kind of made a comment about scaling, and that is something I've heard quite a bit is if I've got, whether it's 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 units that they manage, a lot of it's looked at as, if I had 5 people at this level, then when I double, I need 10 people, I need 15 people. And it's just this ongoing scale. But as we know, those efficiencies don't really work that way. And sometimes if the process really is broken, you end up scaling your people faster than you do your business. And that's when things really get shaky and people kind of start almost chasing this like house of cards type mentality where they're trying to outpace their business growth with their people growth. And it all comes collapsing at some point because the processes, the foundation was never strong, but they had good work ethic, they had good people, but they just didn't have the process to help themselves grow. And I do appreciate the fact that you kind of broke down some of the what best in your business, the whole utility billing and how there are some, I guess, pitfalls along the way if you're not doing that efficiently, and how that can actually affect your bottom line as well. And I don't know where it ranks, but I know the cost of water, gas, electric, things like that at these properties ranks very, very high in the list of costs for that property. So if you're mismanaging those pieces, if you're not applying the cost to the residents appropriately, that's a scary thing for a lot of these companies.
Yeah, because you're at some point, you're having to absorb cost. You might have baked it in the beginning and had some overhead, but eventually, that's going to go up.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about like implementation of this philosophy, of this framework that we talk about, Lean Six Sigma. And what are kind of the steps, or if people are thinking about this, they've heard about this, and they really want to make this work for their business, kind of where can they take this at this stage? What should they do next?
Well, I'd say first start small. So don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to take on the biggest bad process, but start with the concept of let's map out all the activities to get a particular value stream completed. Maybe it's a lease, maybe it's billing, maybe it's lease renewals, maybe it's it could be any of those processes that are involved. Resolving an incident. If you ask the person, they'll tell you, here's the 10 processes, and this one's the biggest pain. And start with the one that's the biggest pain, because that's where you're going to get the best value. But start small. Don't try to sit there and we're going to do all 10 processes. Doesn't work. Start with the process, and you're going to learn how the concept. You're going to learn how to take that process and break it down into the boxes, if you will, and then find out who owns each box and what does that box do? How much does it take? And if you go, well, that's 3 different things, well, then break it down into 3 different things. Because once you look at the whole value stream, now okay, the input for A goes to B, B goes to C, C goes to C, A, B, C, D, all that fun stuff. And once you break that down, again, we're not drawing flow charts, we're drawing boxes. We're drawing, we're understanding. We get done and add it all up. We go, oh yeah, that's why it takes 2 weeks, because if you add it all up, let's go look at all the time we're waiting. We talked about the waiting time. Oh, you know what? 60% of the time it takes, somebody's waiting on somebody else, and there's other people are laying idle. And so you start looking at it and you start asking each process, how do you know when to start your process? Or how do you know when it's completed? And these are like practical questions, but when you ask people to think about it, it's almost like asking a touch typist, what finger presses K? You're like, oh, I don't know. You got to think about it for a second, and you kind of break it on down. And once you've got that all lined up, then you essentially got a spreadsheet view of what your process looks like, a mathematical view, and you can start to understand where would it have the most impact if we, focused our efforts on this part of the process. And everybody's going to be different, but that's what I would say. And again, you're interviewing the experts. And if you brought somebody in who's done this before, people start understanding how these interviews actually work. And you walk them through the process a few times. Then as we were talking about, are they batching some processes? Well, there's probably a good reason why you're batching it. Or or are you sitting there waiting just for the next one to come through? So if there's a lot of waiting, maybe there's opportunities, and you'll see this too, transcribing information. Somebody writes it down. You ever go to the doctors? Go to the doctors, you fill out a form. Then you go to the next room and you get the same questions, and you're filling out another form and another form. You're like, I thought there was electronic medical records. Why do we keep entering the same name? My name hasn't changed from 10 minutes ago. It didn't change from my last appointment, over and over and over again. It's just riddled with waste, but those kind of examples do apply in the multifamily industry. And just pushing everything into one system may not be the right way, because then sometimes you can't get the data out you want to get out. So as I said, technology comes last, as a technology vendors, that's probably not what you want to hear, but you do want to hear customers that are able to maximize the capabilities of your technologies. The worst thing to do is have somebody buy your technology and you're like, well, it doesn't work because their process is flawed. Okay, then we can all come together. Let's get people to working on their processes, and then the right technology would be the better solution.
Yeah, I mean, we all want to sell our solutions, but at the end of the day, we want people to use those solutions and become really sticky long-term customers, right? And if they can't use our product well, no matter what product it is, they won't be a customer for forever. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, when we think about the types of people that can use Lean Six Sigma, is it a certain size company? Is it all types of different size companies? Where is there a sweet spot?
All sizes, big or small. But I say just start small. Start on a single process. You'll see these lean initiatives at these multinational companies, and they'll bring in and do this great fanfare. It's like, well, they would have got more out of it if they'd have started small, and then, incremental improvement instead of trying to do so many things at once. Small companies, again, they're very similar in processes, but just the fact that a lease is not a lease is not a lease, or a renewal is not a renewal, not a renewal. You need to look at your process and map it out and understand it. And only the frontline people are the best people that know it, right? And typically in Lean, management's not involved in the initiative. It's got to be empowered by the people, just like Agile or the Scrums and all that fun stuff. Is they're powering the process and they're reporting out what they want to do. So they're qualifying, this is what we do, and then they're quantifying, this is how long it takes, this is how long this takes. So they've got the data they need to say, if we invest in this process, we could reduce this by 80%. Well, 80% times whatever dollar an hour that's actually costing, you're starting to see the value of what I can do to improve and get the outcome. Maybe it's reducing cost. Maybe, we get our insurance has gone up 45% in the last 2 years. Well, why? Oh, it's because it went up because we had 4 leaks. Well, how often do we have leaks? Okay, now we can start thinking about, if we do preventative maintenance, then we can prevent those leaks from happening or get a better control on them. So then we can impact that 45 or better mitigate that 45% raise in insurance, and go back to our insurance company, says, we haven't had a claim in 14 months. If you can't give me a better rate, I know somebody that will, because we got a good track record now, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And, you use the word outcomes a lot. And I think that's making sure that your team is aligned on outcomes. What is the goal? What are we actually trying to produce here? What's the customer experience that we believe represents our company well and produces a happy environment, a profitable environment for the people that are engaging with it? I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, as we think, oftentimes we talk about technology and kind of the future and stuff like that on the podcast. Where do you see, I guess, the future of the multifamily and property management space as it relates to Lean Six Sigma? You had mentioned earlier that there's just so much opportunity in our industry because this type philosophy isn't really prevalent quite yet. So where are we headed with this? What's the future look like?
So we're kind of in the beginning to middle stages, what I call the digital transformation. People used to, everything was done on paper, right? But now I can actually get a lot of information right there from my mobile phone, right? Or I can communicate between systems, and I don't have to sit there and transcribe it from one system to the next. It's the internet. All these systems can talk to each other through API. So technology is going to help us with the flow, right? So I'm not having to reproduce and all this stuff. But if my process is wrong, then I'm not going to be able to link the information together anyway. So where I see lean is, we talked about the concept of lead time, flow time, data gathering. So where technology is helping us do is, it's in the world of lean, they call it shift left. what more work can you shift to where the original consumer is doing a lot of the, giving you the information you need, and then it flows all the way through. So yes, having a mobile phone or a portal is a start, but everything behind that has to be right for, now you can go to insurance companies and get a quote, instantly, because what they've done is once they gather enough information about you, all the back-end systems can do the statistical analysis and figure out what's going on. The same thing with, lease renewals. If I were to look at, 20% of my people are late on doing lease renewals. Well, why? Well, they don't remember. They weren't informed. Well, I can use some type of targeted notifications when I'm proactively looking at my renewals to make sure people are being notified, not printing out a piece of paper, not having to chase the person down, but getting to them and saying, okay, if they are going to renew, then why don't I just present the form with that? And then I get flow all the way back, and then I get confirmation. So I see technology has finally gotten to the point where it is aligned with the ultimate outcomes of what you want to achieve with these lean initiatives, rather than you get a lean initiative, you can only go so far because technology is not there. There's plenty of technology out there that can do that if you know how to architect your process and which technology to insert into which component of the value stream.
That is so well said, and I completely agree. The technology is there. I think the real question is like, how do you apply it, when to apply it, where's the most value in how you apply it? All of those things are really the questions that people need to be asking. So as Larry, as we kind of turn the corner and kind of come to the end of our episode here, I want your advice. If somebody is maybe considering this, or maybe they're not considering this, they think this is just not the right fit for our industry or right fit for their company, what advice would you give to those that are listening to this that just have more questions now that they've listened to this and had a deeper thought about Lean Six Sigma?
Yeah, we talked about resistance earlier. Some people are going to say, well, if we automate that, or if somebody publishes that, then where's my job, right? So what I would do is, if we start off is everybody's got a frustration in their job, right? And then asking people where their frustrations lie. And then what you'll find out is if they could have a chance to change, and sometimes you don't say, what are you frustrated about? It's like, if there's one thing you could change, what would that be? I mean, don't even start with the lean process analysis and stuff. What would that be? And then one idea leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And eventually what you have is a list of ideas you've brainstormed, and you can start creating what we call a project chart around that. Okay, if we were to change this, what would we want it to be? If we could change this. So now you've gone to the people that are probably the most resistant using their words. And a lot of people, armchair quarterbacks, oh, that sucked. They could have done this, they could have done that. It's like, well, if you had an opportunity to change, and then sometimes you're going to get people, I don't know. They're just perpetual complainers. Well, they're not going to make it through this lean transformation. But if somebody's willing to give you an idea of if they could change something and here's what they'd like it to be, now you've got a business application for looking at it from a lean perspective. Now you can start applying these techniques to something, and it all started with the person who was frustrated to begin with. That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, that's great. So talk to your people, right?
Talk to your people.
Talk to your people. What would they change? And again, I truly believe most people want their jobs to be enjoyable. They want to know they're adding value. All of those things are really important to people. And if you give them the opportunity, the space to communicate that, I truly believe, like you said, most people, maybe it's 80-20, 80% of people will step up and have that conversation, where maybe the other 20% are just going to be very resistive to change and will need to kind of come alongside as they see success, right? As they see things start to change and see things get better. Well, Larry, if people want to learn more about Lean Six Sigma, if they want to learn more about you, learn more about MuniBilling and multi-billing, what's the best way that they can do some of those things?
The nice thing about lean, you could, by the time you type in the word lean in a Google search or whatever search, it starts netting out. There's a ton of videos out there, free stuff, ton of free videos, free tutorials, free training, Lean Six Sigma. There's a book. I love this dummy series. I wish I read all these books on lean, and then finally a book came out called Lean for Dummies. And then I found another one, Lean Six Sigma for Dummies. Buy that. Get that one. The authors of that just break it on down into the most layman's understandable terms. So I love the dummy series. So if you want to start there, look at the videos, look at a couple things, look at that Thomas Jefferson video. It's like, oh, wow, we probably could relate to that. Get the Lean Six Sigma demo. You go to our website, multibilling.com or munibilling.com, and we have some You don't have to give away your first child or any of that stuff. You just download some of the stuff, and it's all free. We didn't invent it. We just kind of packaged it, branded it the way we use it. So you're just using our tools. They're free. There's so much free stuff about lean, but I'd say, to get started, find somebody, and there's consultants in this industry. I'm not going to promote any one over the other that focus on lean, but then also talk to your vendors, talk to the rent manager, talk to the multifamily. Find out how they're enabling Lean Six Sigma, because if they're promoting the technology and if they're truly embracing lean, they know what kind of outcome they want you to help achieve. And then now you've got a company that's not just trying to sell you a technology or hardware or software. They're trying to help enable your success and become a partner with you and enable you rather than just, here you go and, have fun with it.
Oh, that's great. That's great advice. And I'm really glad that there's so many available resources. I guess that's the world we live in. And so you're embracing that and providing some great free resources out there for people to learn more, because if we all can get better, right, we get better together. And I think that's a lot of what I've seen in the multifamily industry and, the other segments of residential property management is that we are trying to create a better community and help each other out. So I think that's wonderful. Well, Larry, I can't thank you enough for coming out to visit us here and be in studio to have this great conversation around Lean Six Sigma and what it can do and how it works and all the different nuances. Obviously, this was a little bit an extended episode. We kind of knew that going in, that this was going to be a big topic. So really appreciate all the time and all the insight that you provided today.
I appreciate it, Joe. I finally got on a podcast with Joe.
So that's right.
Made my day. Bucket list item, So thank you very much.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And to our audience, thanks for joining us for another episode. Make sure you check in on Larry and the MuniBilling team to see what else they can do for you. And until next time, keep going beyond rent.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond Rent. If you enjoyed this podcast, spread the word on social media and with your peers in the industry. To be notified when more episodes are released, subscribe using your favorite podcast player. Beyond Rent is brought to you by Rent Manager Property Management Software. Learn more about Rent Manager's industry-leading software solutions at rentmanager.com. Until next time, keep going beyond rent.